Good morning, everyone. My name is Chloe, and I'm the health coach here with Ready Care. And this morning, we're going to be having a look at the topic of managing slip ups, which is something that comes up very often with people. Of course, it would. It's a very natural part of any process anybody would undertake. In the beginning stages, it can be very easy to be very enthusiastic, really hell for leather, and really all about it. But as the weeks go by and the novelty of something wears off, it's a very natural part of the process to have some off days, and it's just about having a look about what happens when the slip ups happen and how do we get back on track. So the first thing to kind of take into account with slip ups is that it is absolutely very, very natural. With the best of intentions, anybody can find themselves in a situation where unfortunately things have not gone to plan. The first tip that I would give anybody is to stay calm. And that can sound quite placid as advice, but really I'll explain the mechanics of why staying calm when something like that happens is going to really support you far greater than beating yourself up. So the brain has what's called a threat response. This is in the amygdala, and it is triggered by things that it would see as stressful, dangerous. And what happens there is the brain will get flooded with cortisol and noradrenaline. And this can cause a reaction where it inhibits lateral thinking, it reduces your cognitive resources, and impacts the way that you would think. So you would think a little bit differently than you usually would when you're firing on all cylinders. When your brain is under that level of stress, it starts to really shrink what it processes. So this can activate some behavioral defenses. That can show up in ways like getting a bit shut down to something. It can really inhibit your ability to make informed decisions. It can inhibit your ability to look at the big picture of where you're at, and everything becomes quite now, present, what's happening right now. Sometimes what can happen with that is we lose sight of why we began something in the first place. So the more stressed you are, the shorter term your thinking becomes. Now, that can be the triggering event in the first place. It can be what led to the slip up to begin with, but it's also important to think about how you react after the slip up. So the more stressed you get about it, the more you worry about it, the more you trigger your brain's response that starts to shrink your ability to get yourself back on track. It starts to shrink your ability to adapt to change behaviors. So the brain will revert back to what it knows. And it'll go right back to old patterns. So, a really good way is to just remind yourself that it's not just a platitude, but the more stressed you get about something, the worse the mechanics are going to be. So, step one, stay calm. It happens to everybody at some point. The other thing is minding your negative self talk. So, in the brain, your self talk will trigger emotional responses, it'll trigger thoughts, it'll trigger patterns. So, look out for things like black and white thinking, also known as all or nothing thinking. So, that can show up sometimes when somebody might have had a slight slip up and they go, oh, jeepers, that's it, I'm done. I'm done. I'm having the whole slice pan, I'm having chips, I'm having everything. Everything's coming out. Um, so I think we've all been guilty of that at some stage, but really looking at the original event, does it really warrant going, oof, the whole thing's out, the baby's out with the bathwater? The other thing to look out for is mental filtering. So how that can show up is that we forget everything good that we've done, and all of a sudden we're the worst person in the world. We've never done a good thing in our lives. So the brain can start to, especially under a threat response, the brain can start to filter out anything that goes against the held belief. So if the held belief and the thought pattern that you're putting into yourself is, geez, I'm an awful person, or that it's not worth even trying, it'll start to filter according to that and go, yeah, maybe it's not worth trying. I tried that thing once and I failed, therefore I should never try anything ever again. Which is a very unhelpful way to think about things. So that's mental filtering, black and white thinking, or all or nothing. Disqualifying the positive would fall into this. So really take stock of what you have done well, what got you to the point where you're at now. That, take stock of all of the days that you had that were good days. It's very important when there is a slip up to actually go, you know, I'm at day 60, and instead of focusing on I've lost my streak at day 60, go, jeepers, aren't I brilliant? I got all the way to day 60. Fantastic. The other thing is emotional reasoning. So an example of that could be, I feel bad, therefore I must be bad, or I feel like this is pointless, therefore it must be pointless. It's kind of a little bit of thought exercises goes into this, where it's good to have a little bit of a meta look at your own thinking patterns, at the type of things that you tell yourself, and whether it's helpful or unhelpful. A very, very common one that we would see is catastrophizing, which, I kind of touched on with the baby with the bathwater, which is basically, you know, it's like a domino effect. You tip the domino, you had a small slip up, and all of a sudden the sky is falling. So just to be careful that that you catch yourself, because it's human nature to perhaps go into these types of thought patterns, but to pause, breathe, catch yourself, and go, am I kind of, have I gone off track a little bit with my thought process? Is this going to be particularly helpful? Um, and using shoulds is a big one. Using shoulds will be things like, I should have done so much better. I should have, and it's very common in our parlance, and really should basically means that whatever you've done is not good enough, and you're placing the onus on this externalized idea of how a person should behave, which kind of brings me to the point of, give yourself the same compassion that you would to a friend or loved one. um, Try to flip the mirror of, if they came to you and they said, oh, I've had a really stressful day, you know, things totally derailed and I'm feeling absolutely terrible. Most of the time, that would be met with a degree of compassion, and that's really the way that we should speak to ourselves with slip ups. So managing the black and white thinking, all or nothing, being careful that we're not filtering everything good that we've done just to focus on the little things we might have done imperfectly, totally disqualifying the positive, and really sinking into that, oh, jeepers, I'm the worst person in the world, therefore it must be true. um, and put your thoughts on trial. Give yourself a moment after you've kind of calmed down and go, great, this has happened. I'm back to calm. I'm back to centered. No, I'm not the worst person in the world. No, I've done lots of amazing things to get me to this point. I'm very committed. I had a bad day. I'm a human being. I'm not perfect, and that's okay. The other thing is to have a look at the events that led. So if I love doing this with people. So if you're quite serious about getting yourself back on track, approach the slip up, and instead of burying the head in the sand and going, oh, that never happened, we're back, which that works for some people, but a much more helpful way to approach those is to have a look at the scenario, have a look at what led to the slip up. So that can be within yourself, it can be within your environment. Was there a potential trigger? Might it be your energy levels? Your motivation, sorry, your willpower. Your willpower decreases when your energy is low, because willpower takes a degree of energy in the brain. And when our energy levels are low, it goes, oh, jeepers, we don't have enough to be going all the way up. So energy levels is one that's actually quite common. People will say when they're tired, they're more prone to making poor decisions with their health. Preparation, was it your environment? Were you out of your routine? So really have a look at all of the context that led to the slip up, and give yourself a moment and approach it with curiosity. you know be kind to yourself and go, what actually happened there, and what could I do so that I make sure that it doesn't happen again? An example could be, I went to an event and jeepers, I was starving by the time I got there and there was nothing for me to eat. So I had to have the cake because I was absolutely famished and I was getting very hungry. So a good thing there to go is, right, you had the cake. Are you going to have the cake tomorrow? Are you are you going to run into the bakery and go, that's it, give me everything you have? No, but you had something, and now you have great information because you know that when you're hungry, it's like the Snickers ad, you're not you when you're hungry. You're more likely to make some decisions outside of what you would usually do in your routine. So a great learning opportunity there is travel with snacks. Don't arrive to the party hungry, which is a great tip to give anyone, really. Give yourself some opportunity to have a look. What happened? Check yourself, check your emotions. Were you a little bit upset? Is upset something that gets in the way of your willpower? Is pressure? Pressure is a big one, actually. Pressure is one that a lot of clients come back and say, look, I couldn't be dealing with talking to them about what I'm doing. I didn't want to go there. A good thing to do is potentially let people know what you're doing ahead of time if you want to, and just let them know it's not really it's a personal thing that you're doing for your own health and not particularly up for debate. um, and say it ahead of time before going to an event, for example. Otherwise, just make sure you have stuff with you. That's a big one. So with the slip ups, really looking at what led to it, from a place of curiosity, compassion, like if just as an exercise, really, in life, it's a very good way to go. I'm a human. I made a little mess up, and that's totally okay. I'm not going to be 100% all of the time. Nobody, I don't think anybody expects that of anyone. And it's just about, what do we do when that happens? So a little summary would be: stay calm, bypass the brain's threat response, don't fire the amygdala. It'll stop your ability to think with your adult cap on, basically. It'll impair your ability to have adaptive thought, to think from a big picture, which is really that is the approach most people would take when they're looking to change their health and behavioral patterns. It's a big picture. It's an aspirational way of thinking, and that begins with, you know, not falling into the trap of getting very, very high stress. And people notice that if you're at work or anything and you've made an error, and you get stressed, that's usually when things snowball, because you start making lots of different errors because you're not thinking properly. Um, so that would be one of the ones: is get yourself calm, because your brain is not going to work with you if you're in a very, very high stress scenario. Um, Negative self-talk will hold you back. It's going to feed, and you know, it sounds simplistic almost to say, don't be unkind to yourself, but really, on a biological level, being kind to yourself is going to help you get to your goal. So if you do the whole derailing, the black and white thinking, the high stress, it's moving you further and further and further away from your ability to function at the highest level that you can, to get yourself to a place where you want to be. So bypassing that, take a moment to go, are my thoughts helpful here, or are they working against me? Take the slip up as a learning opportunity. And for those that would be familiar with workplace SWOT analysis, it's very, very similar. Take a slip up and go, what worked up to that point? What didn't work? Are there any potential threats to, or any potential challenges that can come up, and how do we mitigate those? So overall, with slip ups, it's a very, very human. It's a very, very human thing to happen. Your attitude towards the slip up will be the thing that will set you apart from. I think there's a Winston Churchill quote that says, "Success is the ability to move from one failure to the next with no less enthusiasm." And that's kind of the approach to take with slip ups: is they happen. What can you learn from them? and how can you utilize that to get yourself closer to the goal instead of further away. Thanks a million for listening, guys. Andrew will be there next week talking about vitamin D. So have a lovely day, guys, and thanks for watching.